The crowbar groaned, a low metallic complaint against the stubborn, century-old wood. Dust motes, disturbed from their long slumber, danced like frantic sprites in the single, sharp shaft of afternoon light that pierced the gloom of the nave. Lily Evans's knuckles were bone-white where she gripped the tool, her breath held tight in her chest, a prisoner of anticipation. The plank resisted, clinging to its secrets, then gave way with a splintering shriek. It flipped over, revealing not the packed dirt and stone foundation she expected, but a dark, perfectly square void. From the opening, the top of a stone staircase descended into absolute blackness. A cold, ancient draft, smelling of damp earth, deep stone, and forgotten prayers washed over her, raising goosebumps on her arms. She'd paid just $11 for a forgotten monastery, a place where even the ghosts had seemingly moved on. But as the floorboard splintered, Lily Evans had no idea she was about to uncover a secret hidden for 100 years, a secret worth over $3 million. She didn't know that the monks who had lived here had left behind more than just prayers. Before we carry on, please hit the subscribe button to make my day and let me know where you are watching from in the comments. 2 weeks earlier, the only ancient thing Lily was contemplating was the fossilized Cheerio stuck to the leg of her kitchen table. The table, a wobbly hand-me-down, was buried under a landslide of paper. Bills mostly, final notices in angry red, polite but firm reminders in stark black, and the occasional crayon-adorned masterpiece from her son, Leo. The cramped apartment was filled with the evidence of their life, a mosaic of love and immense financial strain. The air smelled of burnt toast and the low-grade panic that had become Lily's constant companion. As a freelance graphic designer, work was a fickle tide, and for the past few months, it had been nothing but a desolate ebb. At the far end of the table, 7-year-old Leo was oblivious, lost in a world of his own creation. He was sketching superheroes, his tongue poking out from the corner of his mouth in concentration. His heroes were always brightly colored, their capes flowing, their fists ready to punch injustice into oblivion. Lily wished it were that simple. "Mom," Leo asked, his voice pulling her from a spreadsheet that refused to balance. "Can we go to the beach this summer? Like a real vacation, with an umbrella and everything?" His eyes, wide and hopeful, were a physical blow. A real vacation felt as fantastical as the flying men on his drawing pad. It felt like a luxury from another life, a life before her husband had left, before the bills had started breeding in the dark of the mailbox. Her heart ached with a familiar, dull pain. She wanted to say yes, to promise him the world, the ocean, the whole glittering expanse of it. Instead, she manufactured a weak smile. "We'll see, sweetie," she replied, the words tasting like ash. "We have to be smart with our money right now. Maybe we can have a picnic at the park instead. We can pretend the fountain is the ocean." Leo's face fell just a little, but he was a good kid, resilient. He nodded and went back to his drawing, adding a determined jawline to a hero he'd named Captain Cash. Lily's chest tightened. She was failing him. The weight of it was a physical thing, pressing down on her shoulders, making it hard to breathe. That afternoon, the mail slot clanked. Among the usual junk mail and another windowed envelope that promised more debt, there was something different. A thick, cream-colored envelope made of heavy, expensive paper. Felt important. The return address was a law firm, Blackwood, Finch and Associates, in a town she'd never heard of. Her first thought was that they had finally sent a real person, a lawyer, to collect on some forgotten medical bill. With trembling fingers, she tore it open. The letter was dense with legal jargon, but the gist of it was shockingly clear. She, Lily Ann Evans, was the sole living beneficiary of the estate of one brother Michael, formerly of the Monastery of St. Jude. The name sparked a dim, dusty memory. A great-uncle, her grandmother's brother. A tall, quiet man in a photo, his face kind but distant. She'd met him once, at a family funeral when she was a toddler, a fleeting impression of rough robes and the scent of old books. The letter stated that his estate consisted of a single asset, the derelict monastery itself, perched on a hilltop in the remote Amberwood Valley. To claim her inheritance, she was required to pay a historic property transfer fee, a sum stipulated in the original parish charter from the 1920s. The fee was $11. Lily read the sentence 3 times. $11. It had to be a mistake, a cruel and elaborate prank. She laughed, a short, sharp sound devoid of humor. Then she looked at the pile of red-inked bills, at her son sketching heroes to save a world she couldn't protect him from. A forgotten property was better than no property at all. A ruin on a hill was a foundation, something more tangible than the shifting sands of her freelance career. Disbelief warred with a desperate, clawing hope. What if it was real? The $11 fee was a gamble she could actually afford. It was the cost of 2 coffees, a single movie ticket, or, just maybe, the key to a door she never knew existed. That night, she mailed a check, her hand shaking as she dropped the envelope into the mailbox, feeling like she was posting a letter to a ghost or a fairy tale. 2 weeks later, her old car, a sputtering relic held together by duct tape and prayer, groaned its way up a winding, poorly maintained road. The journey into the Amberwood Valley was a slow shedding of civilization. Paved roads gave way to cracked asphalt, then to gravel that crunched and popped under her worn tires. The landscape transformed, the neat suburban lawns and strip malls dissolving into a dense, untamed wilderness of pine and oak. The air grew cooler, scented with damp earth and the sharp, clean fragrance of pine needles. In the back seat, Leo was fast asleep, his head lolled to one side, his small chest rising and falling in a steady, peaceful rhythm. The sound was a small anchor in the sea of Lily's anxiety. She felt a profound sense of isolation, a feeling of having driven right off the edge of the known world. Every rattle of the car, every unfamiliar shadow in the woods, screamed at her to turn back. Then she saw it. Through a break in the trees, perched on the highest hill like a stone crown, was the Monastery of St. Jude. It was both more beautiful and more terrifying than she could have possibly imagined. It wasn't just a building, it was a presence. Stone walls, the color of old bones, were almost completely consumed by thick blankets of ivy and patches of velvety, green lichen. A portion of the main roof had collapsed inward, leaving the nave open to the sky. At one end, a square bell tower stood silent and resolute against the clouds, its bell long gone. It was a ruin, yes, but a majestic one, a testament to a faith and a fortitude that had long since departed. Wild flowers, vibrant splashes of purple and yellow, grew in thick clusters where pews might have once stood. Lily pulled the car over, the engine shuddering as she turned it off. The sudden silence was immense, broken only by the whisper of the wind through the pines. A wave of emotion, so powerful it almost buckled her knees, washed over her. It was a nauseating cocktail of awe and utter despair. Had she dragged her son all this way, spent her last reserves of hope and gas money, for a pile of crumbling rocks? This wasn't a home. It was a monument to decay. Yet, as she stared at it, another feeling began to surface, something quieter and far stranger. A sense of belonging, a pull toward the history sleeping in those stones. Felt less like an inheritance and more like a homecoming. She got out of the car, the air crisp and clean in her lungs. She walked toward the monastery, her boots sinking slightly into the soft earth. On her back, she carried a small backpack with essentials. A bottle of water, a meager first aid kit, a powerful flashlight, and the crowbar she'd bought at a hardware store on the way out of town. Holding it in the store, she'd felt foolish, a grown woman buying into a child's fantasy of buried treasure. Now its dense, metallic weight against her back felt strangely reassuring, a tool for whatever came next. She reached the outer wall and laid a hand against the stone. It was cold, rough, and alive with the texture of moss and time. She closed her eyes, imagining the lives of the monks who had walked these grounds, their quiet chants carried on the same wind that now rustled her hair. Taking a deep breath, she found the main entrance. The heavy oak doors rotted away to reveal a dark, gaping archway. She stepped inside. The scale of the nave was breathtaking. The collapsed roof created a natural cathedral of light and shadow. Sunlight streamed down in great golden columns, illuminating the ruin in a way that felt holy. The air was thick with the smell of dust, damp stone, and decaying wood. It was the smell of a world ending. Her footsteps, the first human sounds to disturb this place in decades, echoed in the profound silence. She noted the collapsed sections, the precarious-looking beams, but her eyes were drawn to the far end of the nave, to the choir loft. It was darker there, a space more preserved than the rest, sheltered from the elements by its own sturdy roof. She walked toward it, drawn by the shadows. As she stepped under the heavy timbered structure, she felt it, a persistent, cold draft, curling around her ankles like a phantom cat. It was immediately out of place. There were no broken windows here, no obvious holes in the wall or floor. The air in the rest of the nave was still, but here this small, insistent river of cold air flowed from somewhere close by. Her curiosity, a trait that had often gotten her into trouble, was now fully engaged. Her earlier despair was replaced by a sharp, focused intrigue. She knelt, her jeans immediately soaking up the damp from the floorboards. She ran her hands along the wide, ancient planks, feeling the grain, the splinters, the history. She started tapping them with her knuckles. Solid, solid, solid. Each tap produced a dull, flat thud. She moved further under the loft, into the deepest shadows. She tapped again, and there it was, a different sound. Not a thud, but a hollow, resonant thump. It was deep and resonant, the sound of space beneath. Her heart, which had been beating a slow, anxious rhythm, began to pound against her ribs like a trapped bird. Her breath hitched. She pulled out her phone, her hand shaking so much it was difficult to activate the flashlight. The bright, artificial beam cut through the gloom. She ran the light along the edges of the board she had tapped. The lines were faint, almost invisible, coated with the grime of ages, but they were there. Unlike the surrounding planks, which were clearly nailed down with rusted, square-headed nails, this one was different. It was a lid, a door, a secret. She scrambled for her backpack, her fingers fumbling with the zipper. The crowbar felt heavy and purposeful in her hands. No longer a foolish fantasy, but the only tool that mattered in the world. She wedged the flattened tip into a hairline crack she'd spotted. She put her weight on it, leveraging the steel against the wood. The plank groaned, a low, mournful sound of ancient protest. The wood was dense, swollen with damp, and it fought her with a surprising strength. For a moment, she thought it wouldn't move. Then, with a final, sharp crack that echoed through the silent nave, it gave way. The board splintered and flipped open, revealing the dark, square void, the stone steps, and the cold, ancient air that rushed up to meet her, carrying the scent of a story waiting to be told. Lily hesitated at the precipice, her flashlight beam a fragile sword slicing into an impenetrable blackness. The air that rose to meet her was not the foul stench of rot and decay she might have expected, but something else entirely. It was cold, clean, and ancient, carrying the mineral scent of deep stone and a faint, surprisingly pleasant aroma of old paper and beeswax. It was the smell of a place sealed away from the world, a pocket of preserved time. Her own voice felt like a violation of the profound stillness when she called out, a tentative, "Hello!" The word did not echo so much as it was swallowed by the dark, though a faint, ghostly whisper of it returned to her a moment later. A shiver, unrelated to the cold, traced a path down her spine. She was alone, yet the silence felt watchful. After a moment's thought, she retrieved the heavy crowbar, wedging it firmly between the trapdoor and the floorboards, creating a sturdy metal prop. The last thing she needed was for this secret door to swing shut and entomb her in the hill. With her heart thudding a nervous rhythm against her ribs, she began her descent. The stone steps were worn smooth in the center, a shallow, concave dip testifying to the countless footfalls of robed figures over decades. They were steep and narrow, forcing her to turn sideways as she moved. She kept one hand on the wall for balance, the stone rough-hewn and slick with a film of cool dampness that clung to her fingertips. The temperature dropped with every step she took, the air growing colder and thinner, the scent of stone becoming more pronounced. The world of sunlight, dust motes, and wildflowers receded above her, replaced by a subterranean quiet so complete that the sound of her own breathing was a loud, ragged intrusion. The crunch of loose grit under the soles of her boots seemed to echo like a gunshot in the confined space. She counted 17 steps before her feet touched a level floor. She swept the flashlight beam around, her breath catching in her throat. The stairs opened into a small, perfectly square stone cell. It was not a dungeon or a prison. She knew that instinctively. There were no shackles on the walls, no feeling of misery clinging to the air. This was a place of solitude, of contemplation. The stonework was precise, the blocks fitted together with a craftsman's care. The room contained only 3 objects, arranged with an almost monastic simplicity. In the center stood a simple wooden table, its surface scrubbed clean and bare. Beside it was a 3-legged stool, its legs slightly uneven, causing it to rock almost imperceptibly in the stillness. Against the far wall, a small, arched niche had been carved directly into the stone, a dark recess that might have once held a flickering candle or a small icon. The room was stark, ascetic, and yet it felt profoundly peaceful. It was cleaner than any other part of the monastery, sealed away from the decay that had consumed the world above. It was a secret heart, still beating faintly in the ruin's chest. On the surface of the wooden table, catching the circle of her light, lay a single object. It was a leather-bound journal. It was not large, about the size of a modern paperback, but it had a tangible presence in the empty room. The leather was a deep, rich brown, worn smooth at the corners and along the spine, but it was not cracked or brittle. The cool, dry air of the cell had preserved it perfectly. It looked supple, almost alive. Lily's hand trembled slightly as she reached out, her fingers hesitating just above the cover. It felt like a trespass, a violation of some sacred trust. This was not a forgotten relic. It felt personal, private. Taking a steadying breath, she picked it up. The leather was cool and smooth beneath her fingertips, the book heavier than she expected. It felt like it was weighted with the words inside. She sat on the 3-legged stool, the wood cold through her jeans, and placed the journal on her lap. There was no lock, only a simple leather thong that she carefully unwound. She opened the cover. The first page was filled with elegant, looping cursive, the ink a faded sepia but still perfectly legible. The penmanship was beautiful, each letter formed with a patient, deliberate grace. At the top of the page, a date was written, Anno Domini, 1921. Below it, the first entry began. It was, as she expected, a prayer journal. The author, who signed his entries simply as Brother Thaddeus, wrote of meditations of Scripture, of the quiet joys of a life dedicated to God. The early entries were filled with a serene and unwavering faith. Lily found herself drawn in, the quiet rhythm of the monk's prose a soothing balm to her own frayed nerves. She turned the pages, the dry paper whispering under her touch. Then, about a year into the journal, the tone began to change. It was subtle at first, a note of concern creeping into the prayers. He wrote of a winter of famine descending upon the valley. Lily, sitting on the stool in the cold, silent cell, became utterly engrossed, the flashlight in her hand the only light in 2 worlds. Brother Thaddeus's elegant script painted a harrowing picture. The local silver mine, the valley's only significant employer, had struck a depleted vein and shut down its operations, casting hundreds of men out of work just as the seasons turned. Then, a brutal winter, worse than any in living memory, had descended. A series of devastating storms had caused a landslide, washing out the only railway line that connected the Amberwood Valley to the outside world. The valley was cut off, isolated, and starving. Brother Thaddeus's entries became less about spiritual contemplation and more about the grim reality outside the monastery walls. He described the townspeople, their faces growing gaunt, their eyes hollow with hunger. He wrote of the children, their laughter silenced, their small bodies weakened by want. He wrote of the monastery sharing all of its winter stores, the monks themselves taking only the barest rations, but it was not enough. The need was a bottomless well of despair. One entry, dated in the depths of that terrible winter, stood out, the ink slightly darker as if pressed with a heavier heart. Lily read the words aloud, her own voice a hushed whisper in the stone cell. The Lord provides, but our stores are empty. We hear the cries of the hungry on the wind that scours our walls, a lament that pierces deeper than any cold. We cannot stand by and watch our flock perish. The silver we once mined for the church's glory, the tithes from the mountain's bounty, must now serve a greater purpose. It must become bread for the children. A profound, aching connection to this long-dead monk bloomed in Lily's chest. His desperation, his resolve, his fierce, protective need to provide, resonated with the deepest parts of her own soul. She thought of Leo, of her evasive answers about a beach trip, of the constant, gnawing anxiety of not having enough. Brother Thaddeus's struggle was her struggle, magnified across an entire valley. A century ago, the potential treasure she had fantasized about was suddenly and irrevocably recontextualized. It was not a lottery ticket. It was not a windfall. It was a rescue fund, a desperate measure born of love and responsibility. The weight of this realization settled upon her, a heavy, invisible mantle. Her eyes scanned the last few pages of the journal, the entries growing shorter, more frantic. Then she found it, a late entry, the handwriting slightly less controlled, as if written in great haste or under great stress. It detailed their final, desperate plan. "We have constructed the vault of bread beneath the prayer cell," Brother Thaddeus had written. "A second lid, hidden from plain sight, beneath the very floor where we kneel. May God forgive us for hoarding this wealth, but it is done to serve His people. We pray the rails reopen and it is never needed. We pray this vault is never opened." Lily's eyes darted from the journal to the floor, the vault of bread, beneath the prayer cell. Her gaze fell to the flagstones under the simple wooden table. They looked uniform, a seamless floor of gray, flat stone. But she remembered the hollow plank upstairs, the subtle difference that had betrayed its secret. Hope, sharp and painful, surged through her. Getting onto her hands and knees, the cold of the stone floor seeping instantly into her jeans, she began to tap. She moved methodically, knocking on each flagstone with her knuckles. Thud, thud, thud. The sounds were identical, flat and solid. She was about to give up, to dismiss the journal entry as the desperate fantasy of a starving man, when her knuckles struck a stone directly in the center of the room, right beneath where the table had stood. It was a different sound, a lower, deeper resonance, a hollow echo that vibrated back through her hand. It was the exact same difference she had heard upstairs. Her breath caught. Using the edge of the crowbar as a lever, she carefully, painstakingly, began to pry at the hairline cracks around the edges of the stone. It was heavy, perfectly fitted, and sealed with the grime of a century. For long minutes it refused to budge. Sweat beaded on her forehead despite the chill. She repositioned the crowbar, found a better purchase, and put her entire body weight into it. With a low, grinding scrape of stone against stone, the flagstone lifted. Beneath it was not dirt or rock. Beneath it was a thick, dark wooden lid, its surface flush with the surrounding foundation. A heavy, black iron ring was set into its center, flush and smooth. The second lid, the entrance to the vault of bread. Her heart was a frantic drum against her ribs. This was it. This was the moment. She hooked her fingers through the cold iron ring and pulled. Nothing. It was immensely heavy. She braced her feet against the floor and pulled again, her muscles straining, a groan escaping her lips. It lifted barely an inch before thudding back into place. It was too heavy to lift by hand. She slid the crowbar under the edge of the wooden lid, using a loose stone as a fulcrum, and levered it upwards. With a great, groaning effort, she managed to slide the heavy lid away, revealing a dark, square cavity below. In that cavity sat a large, lead-lined box. It was dark gray, its surface matte and plain, utterly devoid of ornamentation. It was built for function, not for beauty. It was sealed, but she could see no lock, only a tightly fitted lid. She tried to budge it, to shift it in its stone nest, but it was like trying to move a piece of the mountain itself. The weight of it was immense, almost unnatural. She had to use the crowbar again, wedging the tip into the seam and slowly, carefully, prying one corner of the heavy lead lid upwards. The lead lining, she realized, was to protect the contents from moisture, from time, from the world itself. With a final grunt of effort, she lifted the corner high enough to see inside. She lifted the lid fully. The interior of the box seemed to absorb the beam of her flashlight for a single, breathless moment, drinking the light into its dark heart. Then, it gave it back, not as a bright, glittering reflection, but as a soft, heavy internal glow. The box was filled to the absolute brim with silver ingots. They were not the shiny, polished bars of movie treasures. They were dense, gray, and stacked with utilitarian precision. They had a satisfying, tangible heft to them, a visual weight that spoke of their immense density. Lily reached in and lifted one. It was heavier than she expected, cool and solid in her hand. On its surface, a small, clear mark had been stamped into the metal. A simple, crossed pickaxe over a three-peaked mountain. It was the mark of the long-defunct Silver Creek Mining Company. It was real. All of it. The journal, the famine, the desperate monks and their secret plan. It was all real. Lily sank back on her heels, the single silver bar heavy in her lap, her breath coming in short, sharp gasps. She was sitting in a forgotten cell, deep in the earth, in front of a fortune that could solve every problem she had ever had. College for Leo, a new car, a house, a life free from the gnawing terror of unpaid bills. It was all here in this dark, lead-lined box. But the words of Brother Thaddeus echoed in her mind, clearer than her own thoughts. It must become bread for the children. This wasn't just money. It was a responsibility. It was a promise made by a dying generation to a starving one. It was the vault of bread. And the weight of that realization, of that sacred trust, was suddenly heavier, more profound, and infinitely more valuable than all the silver in the world. The return to her apartment was a physical shock, a violent collision of two irreconcilable worlds. One moment she was in a sacred, silent space, holding a century's worth of hope in her hands. The next she was standing in the cramped, cluttered reality of her kitchen. The air thick with the smell of stale coffee and the faint, sweet scent of Leo's bubblegum toothpaste. The contrast was jarring, almost nauseating. The pile of unpaid bills on her table, once a source of crushing anxiety, now seemed like a pathetic joke. They were flimsy pieces of paper representing sums that were laughably insignificant compared to the fortune she had left behind in the earth. Yet, the secret she now carried made her feel more trapped, more isolated than ever before. The monastery, the cellar, the silver. It was a world she couldn't share, a barrier that had sprung up between her and everything she knew. She went through the motions of her life. She made Leo his dinner. She read him a bedtime story about a brave knight and a friendly dragon. She kissed his forehead and tucked him in. But she was a ghost in her own home. Her body was present, but her mind was miles away, deep in a cold stone cell beneath a ruined choir loft. Sleep offered no escape. She would lie awake for hours in the humming darkness of her small bedroom, the city's distant sirens a mournful soundtrack to her turmoil. When she did finally drift off, her dreams were filled with the image of the silver ingots, their soft, heavy glow burning into the back of her eyelids. She saw them stacked in the lead-lined box, a hoard of silent, waiting potential. She saw Leo's future spooling out from them, a bright, shining thread, a life without worry, a future that included college, a house with a yard, a real vacation with an umbrella and everything. Then, just as the fantasy began to solidify, the image would shift. The silver would morph into loaves of bread, and the face of a starving child from a history book would stare back at her, its eyes wide and accusing. She would wake up with a gasp, her heart pounding, the words of Brother Thaddeus echoing in the silence of her room. Bread for the children. The moral weight of it was immense, a physical pressure in her chest. She felt like a dragon guarding a treasure that had never belonged to her, a treasure that burned with the desperate prayers of the dead. Driven by a need to anchor the unbelievable story in fact, she began to research. During the day, while Leo was at school, she would take her laptop to the local library, the quiet, studious atmosphere a comfort. She spent hours scrolling through digitized newspaper archives and historical society websites. Her search terms focused and specific: Amberwood Valley 1922, Silver Creek Mining Company closure, winter famine, and she found it. It was all there, buried in the dry, black and white text of the past. She found articles from the Valley Chronicle, dated 1921, announcing the sudden and catastrophic closure of the mine. She found a harrowing piece from the following winter, describing the Great Winter Washout, a series of storms that had triggered a massive landslide, severing the valley's only railway line and cutting it off from all supplies for months. The article spoke of hardship, of soup kitchens run by local churches, of a community pushed to the brink of starvation. It all lined up perfectly with the story told in Brother Thaddeus's elegant, looping script. The journal was not a work of fiction. It was a historical document, a first-hand account of a forgotten tragedy. Her final piece of research was the most difficult. In a private browsing window, her hands shaking slightly, she discreetly searched for the current market value of silver. She found a commodities website and a calculator. She knew the approximate size and number of the ingots. She did a rough calculation, her breath held tight in her chest. She checked the numbers again, convinced she had made a mistake, added an extra zero. But the result was the same. The staggering figure stared back at her from the screen, a number so large it felt unreal, abstract. Over $3 million. The number didn't bring a thrill of excitement. It brought a wave of cold, terrifying dread. This wasn't just a rescue fund. It was a fortune that could change the destiny of the entire valley. A secret that people would kill for. The complication arrived on a Tuesday, in the form of a man named Alistair Finch. Lily was in the town's only cafe, trying to force down a lukewarm coffee and a stale pastry, when he approached her table. He was in his late 50s, impeccably dressed in a tweed jacket and pressed trousers, his silver hair perfectly coiffed. He moved with an easy, confident grace, and his smile was warm and disarming. But his eyes, a pale, intelligent blue, were sharp and intensely assessing. They seemed to miss nothing. "Miss Evans?" he asked, his voice smooth and cultured. "Alistair Finch. I'm the head of the County Historical Society. I do hope you don't mind me interrupting." He gestured to the empty chair opposite her. "I was so thrilled to hear someone had finally taken an interest in the old monastery, a fascinating piece of our heritage." Lily's heart gave a painful jolt, a sudden, sickening lurch of pure fear. She felt as if he had reached into her mind and plucked the secret right out. She forced her lips into what she hoped was a polite, neutral smile. "Please have a seat, Mr. Finch." He sat, placing a worn leather briefcase on the floor beside him. He launched into a passionate, engaging monologue about his love for local lore, his dedication to preserving the valley's history. He was charming, knowledgeable, and utterly terrifying. He spoke of the monastery's founding, of the specific order of monks, of their role in the community. And then, with a casualness that was just a little too perfect, a little too practiced, he leaned forward slightly, his voice dropping to a more conspiratorial tone. "You know," he said, his eyes twinkling, "there's a persistent rumor, a bit of local folklore, that has always fascinated me. A legend about the monks of St. Jude's having a secret silver cache from the old mining days. A sort of emergency fund, hidden away somewhere on the grounds." He leaned back and laughed, a short, dismissive sound. "Pure fantasy, of course. The kind of story that springs up around old ruins. But it makes for a good story, doesn't it?" The blood drained from Lily's face. She could feel a cold sweat prickling at her hairline. He knew. He didn't know for sure, but he suspected, and he was fishing, casting a baited line to see if she would bite. She gripped her coffee cup, the ceramic warm against her suddenly icy fingers. She had to deny it, and the denial had to be convincing. "I'm afraid I haven't found any treasure, Mr. Finch," she said, her voice surprisingly steady. She even managed a small, weary laugh of her own. Just a lot of leaky roofs and crumbling walls. To be honest, the only thing of value I've found is the view. It's more of a personal restoration project, a way to connect with a piece of my family's history. Her denial was plausible, the story of a sentimental descendant overwhelmed by a ruin. Finch's smile didn't falter, but his eyes lingered on her for a moment too long, a flicker of something cold and calculating in their depths. Of course, he said smoothly. Well, if you ever need any historical documentation, or just want to chat about the old place, please don't hesitate to call. He handed her a crisp business card. The conversation shifted to other, safer topics, but the rest of their chat was a blur to Lily. The friendly historian had revealed himself, and the encounter left her deeply, profoundly unsettled. The narrative, for a short time, pulls away from Lily, following the man in the tweed jacket. Alistair Finch was not just a hobbyist. He was a man possessed by a singular obsession, an academic whose passion had curdled into a hungry, avaricious greed. He had been chasing the legend of the monk's silver for over 20 years, ever since he'd first stumbled upon a cryptic reference to a community tithe in a dusty, forgotten church ledger. The sudden transfer of the monastery's deed to an unknown heir, a single mother with no apparent resources, for the paltry sum of $11, was the key he had been waiting for. It was a signal, a disturbance in the historical record that screamed of a hidden truth. He was not a man to get his hands dirty with a crowbar. Not at first. His weapons were research and intellect. He was seen in the county archives, a familiar figure to the staff, poring over old property deeds, tax records, and church charters related to the monastery. He cross-referenced shipping manifests from the railway, looking for any record of a large silver transfer out of the valley before the washout. He found nothing. The silver, if it existed, had never left. His obsession grew. One afternoon, he drove his pristine sedan up the winding gravel road to the monastery. He found the main gate, which had been open before, now secured with a heavy new chain and a formidable-looking padlock. A small, polite no trespassing sign was wired to the bars. He smiled. It was confirmation. She was hiding something. He parked his car down the road and walked the perimeter of the property, his expensive shoes crunching on the fallen leaves. He didn't look at the monastery with the awe of a historian, but with the cold, analytical gaze of a strategist. He studied the walls, the collapsed roof, the layout of the grounds. He was looking for signs of recent activity, of disturbed earth, of newly cleared paths, of any deviation from the slow, steady decay of a century. He was a serious, intelligent, and patient threat. A wolf circling a flock he was convinced held a golden fleece. The pressure from Finch was a catalyst. It shattered Lily's paralysis and forced her to a decision. She could no longer just sit on the secret, hoping it would remain buried. Finch, or someone else drawn by the same legends, would eventually find it. The time for indecision was over. That night, after Leo was asleep, she retrieved the leather-bound journal from its hiding place in her closet. The scent of old paper and beeswax filled her small living room, a ghostly presence from the past. She sat at her kitchen table, the pile of bills pushed to one side, and reread the key passages, Brother Thaddeus's words a direct plea to her conscience. She looked over at the doorway to her son's room. He was sleeping peacefully, his face soft and untroubled in the dim glow of his superhero night light. She could do it. She could take the silver, all of it, and disappear. They could move to another state, another country even. She could change their names, invent a new past. She could give Leo the life he deserved, a life of security and opportunity, a life where his mother wasn't constantly worn down by the terror of not having enough. The thought was a seductive whisper, a promise of an easy escape. But as she looked at her son's innocent face, the words from the journal rose to meet the temptation. Bread for the children. Serve his people. It would be a life built on a lie, a future poisoned by a stolen past. It would feel like stealing, not just from a long-dead order of monks, but from the very community they had died trying to protect. The fortune would be a curse, a constant reminder of her betrayal. A new plan began to form in her mind, a path that was not about escape, but about engagement. It was a compromise, a way to honor the monk's sacred intent, while also securing her own family's future. It was a plan born not of greed or fear, but of her own conscience. She would sell a small portion of the silver, just a fraction, enough to get her and Leo on their feet, to pay off her debts, and to legally secure the monastery and its land. The rest, the vast majority of the $3 million fortune, would be used exactly as the monks had intended. A wave of profound clarity and purpose washed over her. A clean, cool tide that swept away the fear and indecision that had plagued her for days. The weight on her shoulders did not disappear, but it transformed. It was no longer the crushing burden of a secret, but the steady, grounding weight of a mission. She now knew what she had to do. The plan, once formed, solidified with the cool, hard certainty of the silver itself. Lily's first steps were taken with the cautious precision of a bomb disposal expert. She used a payphone at a gas station 30 miles from her town, the receiver sticky and smelling of stale cigarette smoke, to make a series of careful, discreet calls. She didn't call local pawn shops or cash-for-gold businesses, places that would ask too many questions and offer too little value. Instead, she researched reputable metals brokerage firms in a sprawling city several hundred miles away, a place where a woman with a strange inheritance would be just another anonymous transaction. She found one that specialized in estate liquidations and precious metals. When she finally got a senior appraiser on the line, her voice was calm, her story rehearsed. She introduced herself using a fake name, a simple, forgettable Jane Smith. She explained that she had recently inherited a collection of what she believed to be antique silver from a distant relative, items from the early 20th century. She didn't say bars or ingots, she said items, letting the appraiser's imagination fill in the blanks with ornate tea sets and tarnished candlesticks. She arranged an appointment for the following week, the date and time a firm anchor in the turbulent sea of her future. The most nerve-wracking part, the part that felt most like a crime, was the heist. She waited until well after midnight, until the moon was a pale sliver hidden behind a thick blanket of clouds. The world was asleep. She drove back up the winding road to the monastery, her car's headlights off for the final mile, navigating by memory and moonlight. The silence on the hill was different at night, deeper, more absolute. Every snap of a twig, every rustle of leaves in the wind, sounded like a footstep, an observer in the darkness. She unlocked the gate, the new chain clinking with a sound that seemed to echo for miles, and slipped inside, her heart a frantic, muffled drum against her ribs. She descended once more into the stone cell, the air even colder than she remembered. This time she had come prepared. She had 2 heavy-duty canvas backpacks, the kind used for serious trekking, their seams reinforced. She opened the lead-lined box, the soft glow of the silver a ghostly luminescence in the beam of her flashlight. She felt like a thief, a grave robber desecrating a sacred trust, even though she was carrying out her own carefully considered plan. She began to load the ingots into the backpacks, choosing from the top layers. The physical effort was immense. Each bar was a dense, dead weight, and her arms quickly began to ache. She counted them as she packed, calculating the weight, estimating the value, her mind a frantic abacus of risk and reward. She was taking a small fraction, less than 5% of the total hoard, but the 2 backpacks, when filled, were almost too heavy for her to lift. Grunting with effort, she hauled them up the 17 stone steps, her muscles screaming in protest. The journey across the nave, through the columns of shadow and faint moonlight, was a slow, agonizing trek. She loaded the backpacks into the trunk of her car, concealing them under a pile of old blankets, her breath coming in ragged, painful gasps. She was about to close the trunk, her body trembling with adrenaline and exertion, when a pair of brilliant headlights sliced through the darkness, pinning her in their blinding glare. Her blood ran cold. A car, a sleek, dark sedan, had pulled up silently behind hers, blocking her in. The engine was a low, predatory purr. For a heart-stopping moment, she couldn't move, frozen like a deer in the middle of a highway. The driver's side door opened, and a figure stepped out, silhouetted against the blinding light. It was Alastair Finch. The charming, scholarly facade was gone, stripped away to reveal something hard and cold beneath. His smile was gone, replaced by a look of grim, triumphant certainty. "Working late, Miss Evans?" he asked, his voice no longer smooth and cultured, but sharp and edged with steel. His eyes, glittering in the reflected light, flicked from her face down to the heavily laden trunk of her car, the slight sag of the suspension not lost on him. He took a slow step forward, his hands in the pockets of his expensive coat. "I've been spending some more time in the archives, reviewing the monastery's original charters. Fascinating documents." He paused, letting the silence stretch, letting her fear build. "They speak of a community tithe held in trust by the brothers. A significant trust meant for the valley's welfare. A trust that has never been accounted for." Lily's heart hammered against her ribs so hard she thought it might break. This was it. He knew. He had her trapped. The temptation to panic, to slam the trunk and make a desperate, foolish run for it, was immense. But then, the image of Brother Thaddeus's journal, the feeling of her newfound purpose, rose up to meet the fear. She was not just a thief in the night. She was the executor of a sacred mission. That thought gave her a strength she didn't know she possessed. She took a slow, deliberate breath and looked him directly in the eye, her own expression unreadable. "It's a beautiful night, Mr. Finch," she said, her voice surprisingly calm and even. "I was just enjoying the peace and quiet. It helps me think." She closed the trunk of her car with a soft, definitive click. She needed to get him away from the car, to create a diversion. A bold, unexpected move was her only chance. She decided to play to his weakness, the one she had glimpsed in the cafe, his academic pride, his hunger for discovery. "You're right about the history, though," she continued, gesturing not towards the main nave, but towards a different, dangerously unstable part of the ruins, a section of the west wing where the roof had almost completely collapsed. "It's everywhere. I think I've found the old scriptorium, where they would have copied their manuscripts. The acoustics in what's left of the west wing are incredible. You should see it." Finch was momentarily thrown. His eyes narrowed, his gaze shifting from her car to the dark, crumbling wing she had indicated. He was a scholar, a historian. The lure of a new, undiscovered part of the monastery, a scriptorium, was a powerful bait. His greed, which was fixed on the contents of her trunk, was suddenly at war with his academic curiosity, his desire to be the one to make the definitive historical discovery. He hesitated, a flicker of uncertainty crossing his features. He looked from her calm, open face to the dark, skeletal remains of the west wing, and then back to her car. That brief moment of indecision was all Lily needed. "Perhaps I will," he said slowly, his voice losing some of its hard edge, the scholar momentarily eclipsing the predator. Lily gave him a polite, almost dismissive nod, as if his presence was a minor, uninteresting interruption to her evening. "You should," she said. "Good night, Mr. Finch." Without another word, she walked to the driver's side of her car, got in, and started the engine. She didn't look at him. She put the car in gear and slowly, deliberately, drove away, her headlights cutting a path through the darkness. In her rearview mirror, she saw him standing alone in the night, a dark figure caught between the tangible prize he had let slip through his fingers and the phantom lure of a crumbling, empty ruin. She had outwitted him not with force but with a story. She drove all night, not daring to stop until the sun was rising, painting the sky in shades of pink and orange. A new day for a new life. The trip to the city was a long, surreal journey through a landscape that seemed both familiar and alien. Every police car she saw on the highway made her heart leap into her throat. Every mile marker a small victory. She arrived in the sprawling metropolis feeling like a refugee, an anonymous face in a sea of millions. The brokerage firm was located in a sleek, modern skyscraper of glass and steel, a world away from the ancient stone and decaying wood of the monastery. The air inside was cool and smelled of money and air conditioning. The appraisal was conducted in a private, soundproof room, the tension so thick Lily could taste it. The expert, a quiet man with magnifying glasses perched on his forehead, handled the silver ingots with a reverence that surprised her. He weighed them, tested their purity with a small chemical kit, and examined the stamped maker's mark with a practiced eye. He confirmed their authenticity, their high-grade purity, and their significant historical value. The mark of the Silver Creek Mining Company, he explained, was rare, as most of their silver had been sold to the federal government for coinage in the early 1920s. An estate collection like this, he said, was almost unheard of. Lily held her breath as he did the final calculations. She had sold the portion she brought, and the final figure he quoted was just over $150,000. The number, spoken aloud in the quiet, sterile room, felt both impossibly large and strangely inadequate to represent the weight of the history she had carried in her trunk. The money, a life-changing sum that would solve all her immediate problems, was wired to a new bank account she had opened that morning under her real name. Walking out of the skyscraper and into the bright city sunlight, she felt a dizzying sense of relief, but not of triumph. This was not the end. It was the beginning. Her next stop was a law firm, one she had researched for its expertise in charitable foundations and trusts. She hired a lawyer, a sharp, compassionate woman named Ms. Albright. In a quiet, confidential meeting, Lily laid out her plan. She didn't reveal the full story, the trapdoor, the journal, the $3 million hoard. The secret of the vault of bread was too sacred, too dangerous to fully share. Instead, she told a carefully edited version of the truth. She explained that she was the sole executor of a historic, private charitable fund established by a religious order in her family's past. The fund, she explained, had been dormant for nearly a century, and she wished to reactivate it in accordance with the founder's original intent. Her inheritance, she implied, came with this profound responsibility. Using a significant portion of her newfound funds, she instructed Ms. Albright to establish the legal framework for a new, official nonprofit organization, the St. Jude's Valley Trust. The name was a quiet tribute to the silent bell tower and the forgotten monks. Then came the final, most important step. She anonymously donated the rest of the silver, the vast majority of the fortune still hidden deep in the earth of the monastery, to the trust. She provided Ms. Albright with a sealed envelope, containing a hand-drawn map and a key to the monastery gate, with detailed instructions on how to access the donated assets. The instructions were to be followed by a bonded and insured security team, and were written in a way that protected Lily's identity completely. She was merely the facilitator, the messenger for a century-old act of charity. 1 year later, the monastery of St. Jude was no longer a ruin. It was a place of quiet, purposeful activity. The overgrown grounds had been cleared, the crumbling walls stabilized. The main building was being carefully and lovingly restored, not as a private residence, but as the official headquarters for the trust. The collapsed roof of the nave had been replaced with a stunning structure of timber and glass, flooding the ancient space with light. It was a place of rebirth. Lily stood in a simple, modern office that had been set up in what was once the choir loft. From her vantage point, through a newly installed, floor-to-ceiling window, she could see the entire Amberwood Valley spread out below her, a patchwork of green fields and small, neat houses. She was no longer the frantic, anxious woman who had first made the journey up this hill. She was the director of the trust, her days filled with purpose and meaning. Outside on a newly planted lawn, her son, Leo, now 8 years old, was playing tag with the children of some of the restoration workers. He was laughing, his face bright with joy, a happy, secure child without a single worry in the world. On Lily's clean, uncluttered desk, next to a vase of wildflowers picked from the monastery grounds, sat a new ledger. It was bound in a simple, sturdy blue leather. She opened it to the first page. The elegant script at the top detailed the trust's initial round of grants, significant donations to every food bank, school lunch program, and family support center in the valley. Her name was written on the top line of the page, in clear, confident letters, Lily Evans, Director. She looked up from the ledger, her gaze drawn to the bell tower. The tower, once silent and empty, now held a new bell, a magnificent bronze bell salvaged from a decommissioned church and restored to its former glory. It was ready to ring again, to call out across the valley, not for prayer, but for community, for hope. The monks' mission, their desperate, final prayer to provide bread for the valley, had resumed, a century later, carried forward by a woman who had come looking for a treasure and had found a purpose instead. The weight she carried was no longer a burden, but a privilege. It was the enduring legacy of Brother Thaddeus and his selfless brethren, a legacy of compassion she would spend the rest of her life honoring. The story of the silver was over, but the story of the trust, her story, was just beginning.